Bitwit's coverage of Computex 2019 is brought to you by Fantex, Cooler Master, Gigabyte, Enermax, Team Group, NZXT, and Corsair. To learn more about our sponsors, click on the links below.
All right, at the Asus booth. Look at that, engineered for excellence, yada, yada, yada. Just show me the X570 boards, damn it. Oh, and X570 boards they have. They actually already have 6 different ROG options on X570 platform, which is kind of unprecedented for AMD support. In the past, we've seen this many options for Intel, but to actually have this for Team Red right from launch is pretty telling of their confidence in the new platform, the Ryzen 3000. For starters, we have 3 ROG sort of crosshair boards, and we have 3 ROG Strix boards. The Strix boards are a little bit more affordable, I would say, than the crosshairs, but they still don't slouch on many of the gaming features that gamers use. However, there are some premium gaming features that Asus realizes the mainstream consumer might not be interested in, and so they've actually stripped those down for the Strix models to keep the prices a bit more reasonable. So we actually have the ROG Strix X570E Gaming right there, looking very, very nice and blingy. The Strix X570F Gaming, E, F, and not G. It would have been fitting if they had a G, but this is the X570i Gaming, the mini-ITX version, which is actually pretty cool. I really like this large heatsink that looks like it's for an M.2 slot. I believe there's also additional cooling under that. Don't quote me on this, but it looks like there's additional cooling under there for the X570 chipset itself, because as we know, it does get fairly warm. It's actually got a much higher TDP than X470. I think it's something like 10 to 13 watts, as opposed to 5 watts on the last gen. So that's quite a big difference. You can see why there's so many active cooling solutions on these new boards. We also have a pretty nice sort of I/O cover here, which looks to be metallic. At least parts of it are metallic, which is also going to aid in heat dissipation. And then we have the big boy. The big boys, the ROG Crosshair 8 Hero. Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi 6, you can see the antennas there. Very nice, sleek aesthetic. Active cooling here on the chipset. We also get an ROG Supreme FX 1220 8-channel codec high definition DAC. So if you have a nice pair of cans, this is going to pair nicely with that. This board's incredibly well engineered from the looks of it and from what Asus is telling us. However, it goes up a step further to the ROG Crosshair 8 Formula. This is their flagship board. You can see it's actually got water cooling integration, water blocked for the VRMs, courtesy of EK, just like on the Crosshair 7 Formula that I used for Hotline 2. We have active cooling once again. Looks like there's an LCD screen right there on the I/O shield, or on the I/O cover, I should say. I'm sure that's configurable as well. It's porting the same onboard audio sound card as the Crosshair 8 Hero. And down here we have the ROG Crosshair 8 Impact. Mini ITX, actually no, Mini DTX. You can see here, this is actually a little bit longer than your standard ITX board, which I have not seen in quite some time. So we actually have this little guy right here. It's actually serving as a heatsink for 2 M.2 slots. So you can do PCIe Gen 4, of course. The whole X570 platform is built around PCIe Gen 4. So that's actually pretty cool. It's actually slotting in horizontally for a reason. That's actually to allow for more airflow to permeate through the actual array and heatsink and stuff, so it actually stays a bit cooler. I actually thought that through. Of course, there is still a full-size by 16 PCIe Gen 4 slot just beneath it, so you can add a discrete GPU. Otherwise, what's the point? Look at that pretty fancy Supreme FX sound card right there. That looks pretty cool. I know that there's something special about that, but we haven't been able to find an Asus rep to help us, so I'm not sure what else to say about it. Looking over the I/O paneling here, there's some mesh design, but more importantly, there's actually what looks to be 2 fans underneath there for active VRM cooling, right on top of the heatsink. Because of course it's going to get relatively warm under load, so Asus wants to make sure that it stays fairly cool for extreme overclocking on this mini DTX board. This is a mini ITX concept case from Asus. Completely concept, so it's not very sure if they're going to bring it to market or not. Doesn't even have a name yet, just concept case. But it's a mini ITX, of course. They're actually fitting the mini DTX board, the ROG one, the ROG Crosshair that we just showed off earlier, X570. You can see we've got 240mm radiator right here on the side. It actually supports 5 fans, which is pretty impressive for the size. You've got 1 intake at the bottom there, 2 of course on our radiator, and there's 2 more up top. which is exhausting hot air currently. We also have a very interesting motherboard layout. It's impossible to see really with all this glare, but the board is actually mounted 11 degrees slanted. An 11-degree tilt, that's basically for a couple reasons. For starters, it actually allows us a little bit more breathing room for our GPU. You can see we've got a nice Strix card here. And by the way, full-size hardware pretty much across the board, even ATX power supply at the bottom. But it gives you a little bit more breathing room, particularly on the left side of the GPU, because it's at a slant, it's further away from the front panel. And if you notice here, there's actually a bunch of ventilation right here, which is of course going to be helping airflow for your GPU. So even a fast-running, powerful card is not going to be suffocated too much. The tilt also gives us more room behind the motherboard tray for cable managing, and I believe you might be able to mount a driver too back there. Of course, they do have an RGB SSD that's mounted right over here, up top of the drive cage, which also has a reservoir pump mount. If you wanted to do some custom water cooling in here, you very well could. You can see here we've got some RGB lighting, and also if you look up there above the motherboard, you can see the rear I/O cables are actually routed down to the back side of the case, so they actually come out relatively gracefully along with the power supply. The concept of this case is to really use a small form factor, but not compromise on performance, full-size hardware, thermals, and even acoustics. So you kind of get everything in here, pretty much anything that an enthusiast might desire in a relatively small footprint. What do you guys think of this case? Let me know. So what we have here is the Asus ROG Swift PG27UQX. As the name suggests, this is a 27-inch monitor, 4K, 144 Hertz, but that's not even the most special thing about it. Those are a dime a dozen these days. What really sets this monitor apart is that it's actually the world's first mini LED tech-based monitor. Mini LED actually offers a lot of the same benefits that OLED does. For example, having really rich, true deep blacks, which also gives you better contrast, higher dynamic range. However, because of their smaller size, they actually don't create any burn-in. There's zero risk of burn-in. You could leave it just pretty much idle like this without moving it for years. Oh, okay, that's maybe a little dramatic. But for days on end, and you would not burn in whatsoever. So they've kind of got the best of both worlds here between an OLED panel, for example, and a more traditional LED. The actual picture quality, I know it's impossible to tell from the camera, but it looks like an OLED display. The blacks are extremely deep and rich, very accurate, because the LEDs are actually turning off for those darker spots. There's actually between 500 to 600 LED zones that can locally dim, which is fantastic. And we also have quite a bit of other specs that are noteworthy, including DCI-P3. So it's got quantum dot technology with DCI-P3 and Adobe RGB support. There's also, oh wait, I pretty much covered it. Wow, I'm good. I'm really good at this. No definite word on pricing nor availability, but expect this monitor to be relatively close to the $2,000 mark. I have my sources. Okay guys, day one is officially a wrap. We're all pretty much tapped out, but we'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching this video. See you soon.